Hello, we're nVent. A new name, sparking big ideas. A powerful portfolio, focused, ready to grow. Enclosures, plus thermal management, plus electrical and fastening solutions equal inspirational ideas. Integrated solutions, inventive products. nVent. Sophisticated solutions, always evolving, always improving. A legacy of invention and innovation for more than a century. Auto-stop machines and early enclosures, durable railway connections, self-regulating heat trace cables. Today, we're here, and here, everywhere. We protect buildings, infrastructure, and homes from winter freezing and safety hazards with our smart heat trace systems. We protect the world's most advanced data centers with our enclosures and cooling cabinets. And we protect buildings and the people in them with our seismic bracing solutions in earthquake-prone areas and critical infrastructure buildings around the world. All designed with one purpose: to connect and protect. The small details, the big differences. The brains behind the scene, sparking simplicity, security, safety. Oh, and if you're a numbers person, here are some of our favorites. $2.1 billion in revenue, 9,000 team members, more than 80 sales offices, manufacturing plants, and distribution centers around the world, and more than 400 patents in the United States and beyond. nVent is the spark that ignites creativity, unlocks potential, triggers growth. Starting today. nVent. We connect and protect.
Good afternoon. So it's my pleasure today to share with you the story of nVent. And so many of you probably haven't heard of nVent, although you might know, as the dean said, about Pentair. But let me share a fact. We are the 21st largest public company in the state of Minnesota. So we employ, just in the Twin Cities area, we have a manufacturing plant in Anoka. We're headquartered in St. Louis Park. We employ over 1,500 people. So we're really sizable in the community. And I'm here to share the story of how did we become nVent. So what I want to talk about is, and it's interesting as you think of businesses, and we were sharing at our table that a lot of companies acquire and divest, but spinning a company as a way to start a company is very different. I always like to say we're a startup, but we've been around 100 years. So it's a great place to be. But I want to talk about why spin, why was that the decision, what's in a name, how did we get to our name of nVent, location, 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 and it's just what you're thinking, what do we do anyways, and then talk about people and culture, because as a new company, that's really important, and then a summary and some time for questions. So let's start with how we got to this point of spinning from Pentair. So the history of Pentair. Do any of you know how Pentair got its name? So let's break this down. What does penta mean? It's a Greek word. 5 and air. 5 guys started a hot air balloon company. And Pentair went on to be in paper mills, to be in power tools. It was a very acquisitive company. And there's a simple timeline here. If I showed you all the different things that were acquired and divested, we would more than fill this chart. Across the top there, you see a lot of the electrical businesses that came into the portfolio. You can see that the brands themselves have a history of being around since the 1940s, all the way up to the acquisition that was done by Pentair of Aeroco. That brand had been around since 1903, so a long history. But a couple of things that were really important. Pentair, as it acquired companies, both electrical and water, and it acquired a valves and controls business, which it decided to sell in 2016. I happened to join the company in 2015, and when the decision was made to sell valves and controls, it left us with a water and electrical portfolio. And what do we know about water and electricity? They don't mix, exactly. So we had two portfolios that had no overlap in customers. The channels by which you go to market for a water company where you're selling pumps and filtration are very different than to electrical contractors putting in solutions for buildings. But we had two sizable businesses that could stand on their own as public companies. And so the decision was made to spin. Now, my background at this time, engineering background, I've worked in a lot of electrical type business and controls and software. And I came to Pentair in 2015 to run one of the water businesses. In the beginning of 2017, I took over the electrical portfolio. So I'm really 3 months into my role when Randy Hogan, who's the CEO of Pentair, called me into his office and he said, now that we're spinning valves and controls, we're going to spin you out as a public company. So I say, oh yeah, I know everything about this business. Who knows everything at 3 months? I was being sarcastic back at him, but he was serious. So imagine that, you're a new leader trying to learn a new business and now you're spinning a public company. You know how many things you need to think about? And this word cloud doesn't even do it justice because there is all the SEC regulations, there's getting a new headquarters, a new brand, a strategy, hiring a new team because we did not have 2 CFOs or 2 CHROs or 2 general counsels. So where do you start? And one of the first places is you have to come up with a new company name. As you submit documents to the SEC that you're going to become a new public company, our finance people were saying, Beth, what's the name of the company that we can put it down on this form? Well, we didn't know. So how do you come up with a new name for a company? Well, it starts with, what do you mean to your customers? Now, we'd been around a long time, so I would argue for a lot of startups who come up with a new company name, they don't have history. We had history. So we had to think about what did we represent to our customers, to the contractors, to the channels, to our employees. And throughout that history, since 1903, we'd been inventing new products. We'd been connecting with fastening solutions. We'd been protecting with enclosures. And this all came into our thinking, and we worked alongside of a branding company. But the most important thing, when you start a new company, you need to get the URL and the website. So you actually have to create words because you just couldn't come up with, we're a connection company and look to buy Connect. Someone bought that in the .com days. So these branding firms have you come up with made up words that sound like what you do, right? So we had words like Alexant. Well, what's that? Electrical and elegant that come together. I'm an engineer, I'm not a creative person, but this is what we did. We had a name that was Voltex, sounds like a transformer. So we had a smaller group of people and we made them all sign NDAs because we didn't want the word to leak out, because if someone thought we were going after a URL, you can't even search on these made up words because someone has an algorithm to say, getting a lot of hits on this new name, let's go buy the URL and then sell it to this company that's thinking about it. That is the case. So we went and got it down to 6 names, and we went to go buy the URLs. We got 3 of them for about $20 off of GoDaddy. That's a pretty good deal. We bought another one for about $60,000, another one for tens of thousands, and then there was one name, and we contacted the individual. He wanted $1 million. So we went, nope, we're not going to be called that. But we came up with nVent, and we acquired nVent. And we stepped back to say, what do we do across all these businesses? And remember, we'd acquired companies all through time, and we never really integrated them. But this was our branding, nVent. At nVent, we believe that safer systems ensure a more secure world. We connect and protect our customers with inventive electrical solutions. And we really liked this idea because you know what invent means. You say invent, people often say, how do you say that? Just like invent, right? Without saying the I. But we liked the colors because we were a water company before as Pentair, right? So blues and greens. But a lot of electric companies are reds and yellows and golds, and we like the black background. Now, how many people in here have a white business card? Just raise your hand. Okay, just about everybody except the 3 tables here of nVent employees. Because we got to do some fun things with branding, right? We got to come out with cool business cards that make us stand out. And I know there's someone saying, well, yeah, but you can't write on this. Well, you flip it over and the backside is actually white, so you can. Now, our brands, remember I shared these brands that had been around that mean something to our contractors, our channel partners. Well, we had never unified those brands. And when we went out to talk to customers about what did we mean, you know what they said? They said, I didn't know that you were Hoffman and Caddy. Erico is part of your portfolio? So we didn't have anything that tied us together. But we didn't want to lose sight of those brands because just like many of you today, who's nVent? We didn't want to replace brands that had been around 100 years and say, everything is nVent. Some companies do that. Branding is so important. It's your identity, right? When you acquire a company, you put value, you ascribe value to those brands. So here's what we did. We wanted to unify the brands with nVent to let customers and contractors know and channel partners we're all one company. And we modernized them. So this is how our brands migrated. So very disparate looking brands to very fresh, modern, including, you know, our team loved that Caddy man. I think he's been around since the 70s. But we've now unified everything. And there's power behind that. Next up, we had to figure out where were we going to be located. You have to find a location that is, I mean, we were going to take half the employees, so we needed to be in around that West End area. But going back to, we're creating a new company. We want to have an environment that attracts talent. I mean, we had to hire 50 new leaders just into St. Louis Park, which is great about being in Minnesota. So I thank many of you, because I'm sure we hired your employees. Always easy to get great talent here. But, you know, we have rough winters, so we have to have covered parking, right? And we wanted employees to do their best work. So again, we looked all around at where we were going to locate. And another thing I learned, you get people to sign an NDA, no one says anything with a legal document. So we decided we were going to have this day in the fall of 2017, where at this point, everyone knew if they were going to be an nVent employee or a Pentair employee. And we said, for nVent employees, we're going to put you on a bus, and you're going to go to your new location, and we're going to reveal our new name. Well, I remember one person said, I don't care about the name, but I really just care where I'm going to work, because if my drive is farther. So here we are, coming off the bus, and we went across the street and made a left, and we're a mile away. But you know, actually it's an even better location if you've been in the West End lately, because there are condos and there's restaurants, and so many of our new employees are millennials, and they've moved into those buildings and they walk or bike to work. There's a hotel right there, so our out-of-town guests Uber to the hotel and walk to our office. So it turned out to be a great location. We moved some folks from Anoka, and they were really worried, but when they got to our new environment, they were pretty excited. Because this is what we used to work in this type of environment. We were very thoughtful. So we used to work like, well, first of all, that's our new home. Nice shot there. It's an old, a mid-century modern building, right, that's been renovated. We have the top 2 floors. And this is what it used to look like where we worked. Okay, not really. But I will say this, in our old office building, in the 80s and 90s, you know how you designed office buildings? You had the executive offices all along the windows and cubes everywhere else. And we had stairs that connected our floors, and I literally could go from my office down 2 flights of stairs and only see the receptionist. That's it. Some of you have offices like that. I know. Well, our mission, connect and protect, we wanted to connect employees. So here's the office environment we ended up with. Every single one of our employees has a stand-to-sit desk. For every employee, we have 2 to 3 workspaces. The offices, there's this great wall of windows on floor to ceiling. And originally the designers had put the executive offices there, and we said, no, that's not the culture we want. We want that space for all of our employees. When you get off the elevator, there's our branding, connect and protect. Very modern, very open. We have copper accents because that's part of being electrical. Notice the red theme there. This is on 2 floors, we have this room which is our mobility hub, which is where employees eat lunch. We have screens, they can collaborate. It's kind of like a lounge at an airport lounge, but just really an open office environment. This is on our 2nd floor. So you can see actually the doors into conference rooms. So you can see people in there, but there's privacy because we've used kind of some of our logo, that's Spark, to just shade the conference rooms. And what's fun about our conference rooms is, have you ever been in your office building and someone says, well, the meeting is in the finance conference room, or the meeting is in the customer care conference room, or maybe it's lakes or trees or something. We named all of our conference rooms after electrical inventors. And we thought, let's have some fun with this, and let's put inspirational quotes. Our communications team, I'm sure they were like, oh, she wants quotes. So they had to do all this work, but these are great quotes. If you look at Thomas Edison, there's a very early electrical inventor. If we did all the things we are capable of, we would literally astound ourselves. Every so often I'm in a meeting and I look up and I see the quote and it just makes me smile. I love Moore's Law. Everyone knows Gordon Moore, you've heard of Moore's Law, it started with the number of transistors in an integrated circuit are going to double every 2 years, right? We accepted that as technology is going to drive change every 2 years, and it keeps accelerating. And his quote is, if everything you try works, well, you aren't trying hard enough. So we have fun things like that. So we've really created this office environment that mirrors the culture that we want to have. And in fact, we got written up in the Twin Cities Business Magazine under office envy. So it was kind of fun. But that's important as we think about acquiring talent of the future. How do we create a workspace where everyone can do their best work? Well, there was more to the office, and there was more to getting a name. I had to hire a new leadership team. And so in hiring a new leadership team, we had across the bottom row 4 folks who'd been in our business in Pentair with over 15 years of business experience, which was important for our customers, that we had depth of knowledge. And the leaders across the top, excluding myself, came in from the outside with public company knowledge. And I wanted to have some gender diversity, so we have one of the more diverse leadership teams. I know it's not 50-50, but it is more diverse than most. And I also wanted a leadership team that is global. So this team have lived in 10 different countries. Some 3, like 3 of us have lived in the UK, 3 of us have lived in Germany, in Australia, in Belgium, in Singapore, in China. So you have to be very thoughtful as you create the type of company and culture that you want. And so when we got to our spin date, and I'm not going to go through all the boring stuff of 6 different submissions to the SEC with very few comments, which speaks to the quality of work in our finance team. But just think about this, 240 contracts, right? Because we had contracts, we had to split those. When we decided to spin, we said, let's get to the next generation technology. So we went from PeopleSoft to Workday. We had no CRM to Salesforce. We went to OneStream, the next version of Office 365. It was so much change, but we didn't want to have that legacy. Let's have a clean break and go forward. And when you look at 20,000 engineering documents had to change to take off Pentair to put nVent on there, or 3,500 marketing documents. The amount of work that people did was unbelievable, all while driving our business, staying focused on our customers, being out with investors to tell the story. And on May 1st, we got to ring the bell, and that is an amazing experience as a new public company. And you can see around the world, signs were getting changed and employees were celebrated. We wanted this to be a great moment in our history. When you become a new public company, there's the New York Stock Exchange, they are steeped in history. You sign a book, and while I signed a book that was new, this legacy of signing a book as a new company goes back to the Rockefellers and the JP Morgans. I mean, there's history for everyone who's ever been a public company. And so it was just great around the world to celebrate that day. A lot of hard work, but we were only just beginning. So what do we do anyways? Now, most of you will not know our brands unless you are in the electrical space, but I want to share with what you do because you're all based here in Minnesota and there's a lot to be proud of in this company. So the investor pitch that I got to give was, you know, we're a $2.2 billion company. We're a very profitable company with 19% return on sales. We have 3 businesses. Enclosures is our largest at about $1 billion, and the other two at 25% of what we do. We serve many different markets, industrial being the largest, commercial second, infrastructure, and we include like rail and data centers in there as well. 2/3 of what we do is in North America. 2/3 of what we sell goes through electrical channels. These are our products. Okay, I think they're cool. I know for some people, they're, you know, I often hear, you do enclosures, what are those metal boxes? Yes, they are. But if you think about, we do $1 billion worth of metal boxes. And now when I tell you this, you're gonna see these, when you look outside or you look on the top of a building, if you're in a factory, you will see a box. Those are typically our enclosures. We are the leader in North America. But as you start to enclose electronics for safety, protecting your assets, it gets hot in there. We do cooling, we have sealing. We have taken enclosures out of flooded factories and the electronics are pristine. So we know a lot about this technology. Our next business, thermal management, we have self-regulating heat trace cable under the brand of Raychem. And this is how you think about brands. Radiation and chemistry, Raychem. We irradiate a cable so that it self-regulates and doesn't overheat. In fact, this was such an accomplishment in 1972 when this cable was produced that last week the IEEE, which is an engineering institute, many of you may know, they celebrated this invention with a plaque. And this is kind of like the Hollywood Walk of Fame, you know how you get your hands and your feet. If you get one of these plaques, you've done something great. Over the last 35 years, there have only been 200 of these plaques, and you literally do put it in your sidewalk outside your building. But that invention of the self-regulating heat trace cable is one of only 200 that's been recognized by the IEEE. So we heat pipelines, we actually do some things around freeze protection. If you have underfloor heating like New Heat, that's us, we're in your home. And the last thing we do is around fastening solutions. So we do millions of connections in the floor, in the wall, in the ceiling, and we have learned how to save contractors time on the job. So all things that are making our lives safer, our assets safer, people safer, saving labor, that's what we do at nVent. A more fun way to tell you what we do is we have 30 million enclosures around the world. It's a lot. We're in the world's largest data centers with our cooling technology. We're on the backs of planes. We're in rail cars. We enclose a lot of critical equipment. For thermal management, we created the self-regulating heat trace cable, and we have more than 1 billion feet installed. In skyscrapers in New York, this technology is so innovative. It gets you 2 lead points where in the past you would construct a building, and if you own that penthouse, you want hot water when you jump in the shower because you've probably paid like too much, maybe $50 million for that penthouse. And it used to be in the old days, you would have a recirculation system, moving hot water up to that top floor. Well, now we just heat trace the pipe, save space, save energy efficiency. So we do a lot of cool things like that. And you know, you may be thinking, well, this is all about cold weather, but a lot of times you have to heat trace for restaurants because if oil or grease is down that pipe, you want to make sure it doesn't clog, or if you have a heavy crude. And we are on the world's largest pipeline in India. Not a cool climate, pretty hot, but making sure that we maintain temperature. And our last business that's been around since 1903, we have more than 100 million exothermic connections. Really cool stuff if you're an engineer, maybe not for everyone, but we've been around a long time. We're in all major North American railway companies. Well, what's the big deal about that? But what goes back to a name, Aeroco. When that brand started, very creative, the Electric Railway Improvement Company. That's the acronym. But we also do a lot for under our brand Caddy, where we've learned, we have a telescoping bracket. We have snap to stud boxes, so you don't need screws. Time on the job is money. We do a lot of prefab work. We sell millions and millions of these things. And our strategy, which I quickly had to get together with the team after being, setting off on this journey, was to really talk about how we became one nVent, how we could scale what we do. What was fascinating is as we'd acquired all these companies, we never thought about market-backed channels and customers. Yet we were a top 10 supplier in the electrical distribution channel, but we never acted that way. We knew we had to go with digital because everything is being sold online, helping your customers search, select, configure, price, quote. So we wanted to scale all this and then look at where we could grow. And that third gray line there, we said not in our first year. We generate a lot of cash as a business, but we weren't going to do any acquisitions because we had enough going on in our first year. But as I stand here today, and we're now 1 year and several months, we just announced our first acquisition of a company called Eldon, which is an enclosures manufacturer in Europe. So we're on our journey executing on our strategy. So in our first year, we grew 5%. We grew our earnings per share 10%. We delivered 100% of our adjusted net income in cash and executed on our strategy. So a good first year, but we're not sitting still, right? There's lots that we still need to do. So I wanted to, at this point, talk about people and culture, because I think it's really important as you start a new company. Some will say that the CEO's job is not just the strategy, but it's about the culture. So we built on a great culture that we had at Pentair. Great values, this idea of being here now, being high on the mood elevator where we're curious versus judgmental, taking accountability. We built on that. It was a great culture. But we wanted to have a management system that was not a TLA or an FLA. Everyone with me? 3-letter acronym, 4-letter acronym. How many companies do you know that they talk about their company X business system, company Y operating system? We wanted to come up with something different that would inspire our employees. When you look at our branding, you see that we came up with a spark around nVent. And the branding company, when we said we connect and protect, they presented us with shields. They presented us with a light bulb, right? And we weren't exactly an insurance company or Game of Thrones, and the light bulb is overdone. But they came up with spark, and we loved that, because what does spark mean? As a noun, it's a fiery particle. It's a sense of excitement. As a verb, it emits fire or electricity. It energizes, it ignites. So we came up with spark. And the first thing someone said is, what does it stand for? But it's not an acronym. It is not the System for Performance and Accountability and Responsibility. Thank goodness it had a K, because no one could come up with a word. But our management system, it works because we want to spark growth. We want to energize people, digital and velocity. And this is our management system. And what's new as we spun is we added digital and velocity, because that's important to compete in today's world. So I'm going to talk about people as I quickly wrap up here. We did our first employee engagement survey about a quarter after we spun. We wanted to know what was on people's minds. Number one, communication. We started an inclusion and diversity and hired a leader. And by the way, most companies call it D&I, but our leader said to us, you can hire as much diversity as you want. If you don't have an inclusive culture, that diversity won't stay. So we think about inclusion first and are launching employee resource groups. It's about valuing your employees. So we have fun, we have this writable wall, and we write things up there like, what did you do at the state fair? But we also appreciate people. We celebrate International Women's Days and other multicultural events around the world. And on our birthday, we started a foundation this year, also something that most new companies don't do in their first year, but we thought it important to give back, especially around STEM is one of our causes, and we asked everyone on our birthday to go out and do some volunteer work. And we want to celebrate too. And we love this because this is one of our warehouses in Cleveland where all their hard hats are in the Spark colors. And it was a surprise to us, but I think it was just cool that people are having fun with our branding. So in summary, when you launch a new company, it is a ton of work. You have to get your name and branding right because there's value ascribed to it financially, but also with your customers and your employees. You have to stay focused on your customers at all times, right? Because they want to know that you're going to be a company that's going to be around for the long term. If you've been around since the turn of the century, they want to know you're going to be around for the next century. And you have to spend significant time with investors telling the story of who you are. And employees, if you don't have great engaged employees, I fundamentally believe you can't have satisfied customers. And those two things are keys to making shareholders happy and delivering that value. So, it's been 1 year. Our first acquisition was announced today, and we're just getting started. So at this point, I'll turn it over to you for any questions that you might have.
Your culture is a big endeavor, switching from the employees switching from Pentair to nVent. And is there anything that you wish you would have done different by the way you've done it?
Well, here's what I would say. It always comes, first of all, one of the things that we thought about very early on is we have a legacy. So we can't just say everything we did before doesn't apply. And we said, let's build on, right? We had a strong foundation. And so we wanted to honor the past and build on it, and then look at what things we were missing, which is why we did that survey early on. I guess I would say, is there anything that we would have done differently? I think it's back to that communication, right? It's so much change that we put our employees through that you can't forget to just communicate, communicate, communicate. Because as much as my leadership team knew everything that's going on, employees in the far reaches of the company didn't, right? And so that's just what I would say is you just can't not communicate enough.
Thank you, Beth. This was fantastic, and kudos to you and the team for getting off the launching pad, more importantly, being successful in where you're going today. One of the things I hear a lot about is the Internet of Things, IoT. So I'm curious, when you think about nVent and IoT, what are you doing to take IoT, translate that into insights, and add value to your customers?
Okay. So we think about this in a couple of different ways. So our thermal management solutions, everything we do has a controller and controls capability. So over the last couple of years, and we just launched our Alexan, by the way, we use that name since we bought the website, our Alexan controllers that are all open in terms of they can integrate, they can be standalone thermostats or commercial controls or integrate into bigger systems. So it makes a lot of sense for that business to have everything IoT connectable. In some of our other businesses, when I showed you that there are fastening solutions in the wall, there is no need to have software in there. I mean, maybe one day, but not yet. But we think about the customer experience. How do we digitize everything and collect data that we can help the customer saying, last time you bought this, associated selling, and making the journey of that purchase experience as quick as possible. So we think about IoT of where it makes sense to connect our products to do that. But in other cases, think about we're even doing some work on data analytics that can help us get insights that we can use to be a better business in our back office, but as well to help us in serving our customers. So I think every business today, even if you look at your business and say it's not software associated, there are ways that we need to use data and connectivity to create better customer experiences and to just be a better business.
Hello, I'm Raj Singh, Associate Dean for the Undergraduate Program at the Carlson School. Question I have is when you change your seating plan and your office plan, how hard it was for the leaders to not aspire for that corner office with the biggest window.
Yeah, I mean, we did, well, boy, we had all kinds of reactions. When we bussed everybody over, the construction wasn't done, and it was this big open environment. We had some employees going, I'm an introvert. Will this space work for me? And so we really had to get everyone accustomed to, I mean, we also said no more phones. We're going to be IoT connected. I mean, so there was a lot of change. And I think we just kept sharing, we're going to create an environment where it's collaborative. And we talk about being digital. Like we've done away this year with get rid of paper, like no more paper copies and presentations. So being away from the walls, I think we just got there because it was such a bright and open environment. And I would say, ask any of these 3 tables behind you what they really think, and they'll tell you. But I think it's thumbs up. Yeah. I think we actually attract people to work for us because we have a great office environment.
Hi, Beth. Thanks for the presentation today. Who are some of the leaders that inspire you personally? This was a really inspiring story, and I'd like to maybe get a little insights from that perspective. Who are some of the folks who have inspired you over the course of your career? Okay.
Well, boy, I guess I would put that into a couple of different categories. I spent 25 years at Honeywell and then moved on to Pentair and, worked for Randy Hogan. He's chair of my board. And I think of some of the leaders that I had at Honeywell who I learned a lot, right? It was a great company to learn and grow. And so I've always been one that I've learned from people who I've worked for, both the good and the bad. But then, as a female leader, early on in my career, I had a chance to work with Sally Ride, who was the first female astronaut who passed away. And you think about, for her as a woman, just the barriers that she had to break through. And I've often thought about leaders like that and just that idea of having tenacity and resilience and just keep moving forward. And I could say that Steve Wozniak inspired me. Yes, the co-founder of Apple Jobs, but my husband, just not that guy. But, it's true, it's true. But I've taken a lot of inspiration from leaders I worked with and people who were first at different things.
Thank you for the presentation. I'm sort of curious what specifically you've done to attract investors to be interested in your company, in addition to things you might have already said.
Yeah, the interesting thing is investors, when you report as a public company, you have reportable segments. And so when Pentair had all these different businesses, electrical was just one reporting segment. So they really didn't know all the things that we did. So I found we had to go out and do a road show and really talk about who we were and what we did. Now, some investors, the way that we attracted them, I think, is first of all, they looked at our profitability and said, that's good, profitable business, and why, and we explained why, and they looked at our cash flow generation. So, we appealed to, and we announced very early on, like right out of the gate, that we were going to provide a dividend. And our parent company, Pentair, had always been a dividend aristocrat, and we followed the same. So to maintain those investors that had moved over from Pentair. But it really came down to ensuring that, we were out there on the road telling our story, that we've been around a long time, we high margins, generate a lot of cash flow, and we're going to be a growth company. And so you get investors when you're a new company that are just hedge funds that are just in there for the event, because they're thinking, okay, we're going to buy low and flip it. You get some of those, but we're now, after a year, starting to see some of those long-term investors, which is what we want to see. But it's a lot about just marketing the company.
Congratulations on your transition. It was certainly looked like a lot of work and well planned out and extremely well executed. So worrying about investors, worrying about transitioning employees and hiring staff and converting documents. As the world is changing out there, you're a manufacturing company, now you have to be dealing with tariffs and everything else that's going on in the world. So how do you think about your supply chain right now?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question because as we have a new strategy, new company, and then here come these tariffs, you know, and we buy a lot of steel, we buy a lot of copper, so we had to adjust to all that. And I think, you know, at the end of the day, it comes down to we assess risk as a business, right? And so when we look at, you know, single source suppliers, or we look at any of those types of risks, this is just one of those other macro environment that we have to look at. How much risk do we think we have, whether it's with the Chinese supply chain, whether it's a single source supplier, and then we ensure that we've got ways to mitigate those risks. And that's what any good company should do. It's no different than thinking about a big threat for everyone's cybersecurity. You know, it's not a matter of if, it's just when. So we have a really good enterprise risk management program that we review with our board, and we work to ensure that we're working with plans against those risks. And I think it's very dynamic, right? So we just got to keep those things in front of us and make sure that we're thinking ahead as to, you know, what's going to change in the world, and how do we have a way to mitigate anything that may come up, even things we don't know today.
The world's a very competitive place. In terms of uniqueness to your product line, patents, execution, what's the proprietary businesses that you own in terms of which ones are the hardest to compete against?
They're all hard. Well, I guess I would say different things, right? So we patented, you know, when you think about the self-regulating heat trace cable, obviously an invention, and we have trade secrets around how we manufacture that in the process. So sometimes in our manufacturing plants, we have trade secrets as how we protect it. In other cases, we launch a new product and we patent it. And I guess I would say this, you know, part of what, when we say this too, we're a $2.2 billion player, almost 2.3 with the acquisition today. We're in a $60 billion space. It's very fragmented. And we have leadership positions. We are the leader in thermal management around the world. We are the leader in enclosures in North America. And one day with this acquisition, I hope to say the world. And we are the leader with fastening solutions in North America. So invention is critical, right? That's critical for us, hence our name. But the second thing we think about is, as supply chains consolidate, being able to respond, which is why we said our management systems are digital and velocity. Because I don't think it's enough these days to have the best product. You have to have a way to get it to your customers quickly in a digital way. So as we go forward, we think a lot about those investments in technology and that customer experience. And just, we hope to be a consolidator, you know, as we go, done our first acquisition. And you know, it's all of those things combined that make us competitive. Thank you.